I never imagined that a life built on so many years of hard work and sacrifice could come crashing down in an instant. It was a Thursday afternoon in Portland, the city I had called home for nearly a decade, when I realized that everything I thought I knew about trust, loyalty, and love was a lie. But before that day, my life had been nothing short of perfect. I'm Ethan Lawson, a 30-year-old software engineer, and I've always prided myself on being a man of purpose. A decade ago, I was just another face in the crowd, trying to make it out of a small, gritty town in the Midwest. Now, I was living the dream, a successful career, a beautiful wife, and the kind of life I had only read about in books or seen on TV. I had it all. Lily, my wife, was the love of my life. We met in college, and from the moment we first spoke, I knew she was the one. At 28, she was radiant, brilliant, and determined. We built a life together. She had left her job as a high school teacher to become an interior designer, and not just any designer. A rising star with her own small business and growing social media presence. Her world had exploded with success, and as her partner, I couldn't have been prouder. We lived in a spacious house in the suburbs of Portland, surrounded by everything we'd worked for. Our evenings were filled with laughter, love, and dreams of the future. Then there was Tom, my best friend, my brother in everything but blood. We grew up together. We built forts in the woods, played pickup basketball in the parking lot, and dreamed of what we'd do when we got older. Tom and I had always been inseparable. Even when he hadn't found his footing and I was climbing the corporate ladder, we stayed close. I was the one who encouraged him to get his handyman business off the ground. I supported him when things weren't going well, and he supported me when I had doubts about myself. We were family. In the early years of our marriage, I was the breadwinner, earning a steady income from a tech job I loved. The work was challenging, but it afforded me the time and space to help Lily build her career. I had to admit that at times I felt like the lucky one. My wife was beautiful, successful, and kind. What more could a man want? My friends, my family, even my colleagues envied the life we had. I lived in a world of comfort, and for the most part I felt safe. I had everything anyone could dream of, and I never once questioned that security. Looking back, there were signs, I suppose. Little things that I ignored because I was too absorbed in my own world, my career, my ambitions, our home. There was that time when Tom started spending more time at our house, coming over to help Lily with design ideas, or just hanging out when I was at work. I'd tell myself, it's fine, they're just friends. And it was fine. Or at least I thought it was. But then there was the phone call. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a project at work, I received a message from our neighbor, Claire. She was a retired school teacher who lived across the street and often kept an eye on things when we weren't home. Claire wasn't the kind of person to overstep boundaries, but her message that day sent a chill through me. Ethan, I hope you don't think I'm being nosy, but I've seen Tom's truck parked in front of your house a lot when you're gone. Just thought you should know. I couldn't explain why it bothered me so much. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was the way she said it, as if something was wrong, but I tried to push it aside. Tom was a friend, and I trusted him. More than anyone, I trusted Lily. So why was this bothering me so much? I went home that evening, trying to shake off the nagging feeling that had taken hold of me. Lily greeted me as usual, smiling and giving me a kiss on the cheek. But there was something different about her, too. She was a little too eager to change the subject when I mentioned Claire's message. She laughed it off, of course, but I couldn't help but feel like something was off. That night I went to bed beside her, holding her close, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced. Could it be that I was imagining things? Could Claire have seen someone else's car? But why would she go out of her way to send me a message like that? I couldn't shake it. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like something was shifting, but this time I couldn't ignore it. Something was different, and I needed to know what it was. The following days felt different, heavier. A sense of unease clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake off, despite my best efforts to push it aside. I tried to convince myself that I was just overthinking things, that Claire's message was nothing more than a well-meaning neighbor being paranoid. But there was something about the way she phrased it, something that lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. It started with small things, Lily's distracted behavior, the way she would glance at her phone whenever I walked into the room, quickly putting it face down on the table. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy with work, but something about the secrecy felt different. The laughter that once filled our evenings now seemed forced, as if we were both going through the motions rather than truly enjoying each other's company. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but to me it was like a quiet ticking clock, each moment counting down, reminding me that something wasn't right. Tom, too, started acting differently. He still showed up at our house a lot, mostly to hang out and help Lily with the design work for her clients. But whenever I came home early, I noticed that he would act a bit too casually. There was no reason for it, really. He was my best friend. But I couldn't help but notice how often he seemed to be around when I wasn't. One afternoon after work, I came home to find Tom sitting on the couch in our living room. He was watching the game on TV, and Lily was in the kitchen making dinner. It seemed normal enough until I saw how they were interacting. Tom was laughing too loudly at something trivial, and Lily was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a distance in her gaze, as if she wasn't truly present. I stood in the doorway for a few moments watching them. Tom caught my eye and gave me a grin, but something about it didn't sit right. His eyes lingered a moment too long, and I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. It wasn't like before. Our friendship had always been comfortable, easy, but this felt different. I pushed the feeling aside and tried to shake it off. Tom was just being Tom, I told myself. Lily was just tired. I was imagining things. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't. The doubt was planted, and it had taken root, silently growing in the back of my mind until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I began watching them more closely. It was subtle at first, like a creeping fog. I'd find myself noticing the way Tom's voice lingered a little longer than necessary when he spoke to her, or how often their eyes would meet across the room. It wasn't overt, but the familiarity between them felt too comfortable, too intimate. There was something unspoken, a connection I hadn't seen before. One evening, I decided to leave work a little early. I had an instinct to go home and, for the first time in our relationship, check in on things. When I arrived, the house was quiet. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I found myself holding my breath, stepping carefully through the door. Lily was in the living room, on her phone as usual. She didn't notice me at first, and I couldn't help but stare at her. My wife, the woman I'd shared everything with. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her completely. But with every passing day, that trust felt more and more like a fragile thread, ready to snap. I walked into the kitchen, my thoughts swirling. Lily quickly put her phone down and greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Hey, babe, how was work?" Her voice was sweet, and there was no sign of guilt, no hesitation. But something in me didn't believe it anymore. I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own life. Later that evening, as we sat together on the couch, I could feel the tension between us. It wasn't just the unspoken things. It was everything. The small silences that stretched on too long, the way Lily's laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. I wasn't sure if she was hiding something from me, or if I was just seeing things that weren't there. Either way, it didn't matter. The seed of doubt had already taken root in my heart. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had to know the truth, whatever it might be. And so, I made a decision. I would find out for myself. I couldn't just sit back and let the uncertainty fester. It was time to confront the growing suspicion and figure out exactly what was happening behind my back. The first clue came when I wasn't looking for it. Like a whisper in the dark that only revealed itself when the silence became unbearable. It wasn't anything dramatic. No sudden outbursts or confessions, just a subtle shift that I felt deep inside. But I knew it was there, lurking beneath the surface. For days after my growing suspicions, I tried to maintain normalcy. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, to let my insecurities get the better of me. But every time I walked through the front door, I felt that quiet unease settle in my chest, tightening my ribs. The house felt smaller, as though the walls themselves were closing in with every passing moment. My own home, the one place I should have felt safest, now felt like a stage. And I was the only one who didn't know my lines. I spent the next few days obsessively checking my phone and email, trying to keep myself distracted from the heavy feeling in my gut. But it was impossible. The unease followed me everywhere. Then came the phone call. It was a Thursday afternoon when the call came in, just as I was finishing up a project at work. I didn't recognize the number, but when I picked up, it was a familiar voice on the other end. Claire, our neighbor. "Hey, Ethan," she said, her voice tentative as though she were walking a fine line between concern and curiosity. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I just wanted to let you know something." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "What's going on, Claire?" "I saw Tom's truck again. It was parked outside your house. I didn't want to overstep, but I thought you might want to know." I felt the blood drain from my face. Claire wasn't one to make a big deal out of things, but the way she said it, as if she were unsure whether she should even be telling me this, made my heart skip a beat. I thanked her, trying to stay calm, but the moment the call ended, I felt the ground beneath me shift. My suspicion had always been there, quietly simmering beneath the surface, but hearing it from someone else made it feel real. This wasn't just my imagination. I hung up the phone, staring at it in my hand. What did this mean? Was Tom really over at our house more than I had noticed? It was a harmless thing at first, just a casual visit between friends. But now, in the wake of this new information, it felt different. It felt like a warning. That evening I came home earlier than usual, my mind racing. Lily greeted me at the door with a kiss, her usual warm smile lighting up her face. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I found myself watching her a little more closely, as if she were a stranger in my own home. She made dinner while I sat at the kitchen table, absently scrolling through my phone. I wasn't really looking at anything. I couldn't focus. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation with Claire, analyzing every word, every detail. I couldn't stop myself. The doubt had taken root, and now it was growing, feeding on my every thought. After dinner, Lily suggested we watch a movie, something light and easy, just like we used to. But instead of feeling the comfort of her presence, I felt a quiet tension between us. It wasn't the words that had changed, but the way I saw her, and the way I saw Tom. Was this just a friendship? Was there something more? The next day I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers. It wasn't just about Claire's call anymore. It was about the way I had started to feel in my own home. I had to know what was really going on when I wasn't around. I called Marcus Green, a private investigator I had worked with on a few smaller cases in the past. Marcus was discreet, professional, and experienced. I trusted him to handle this with the care it deserved. I explained the situation to him, carefully laying out the facts: Tom's visits, Claire's observations, my growing suspicion. Marcus agreed to help. He promised to start gathering information without raising any red flags. The plan was simple. He would keep an eye on Tom, track his movements, and see if there was anything suspicious. It was a small step, but it felt like I was taking control of a situation that had begun to feel entirely out of my hands. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I was doing something. I was taking action. But even as the relief settled in, I knew it was only the beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about how everything had shifted. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage was now cracked, fragile. There was no going back, not now. The first clue had been small, almost insignificant. But now it was all I could think about. And I knew that once you start down this path, there's no turning back. The weight of the truth pressed on me like a storm, slowly gathering strength with every passing day. By the time I made the decision to confront Lily, I knew it was inevitable. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I was still blissfully unaware of what was happening behind closed doors. The suspicion had become a suffocating fog, and the only way to clear it was to face it head-on. I walked into the house that evening, the familiar smell of dinner filling the air. Lily was humming to herself in the kitchen, preparing our usual meal. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. The calmness in the house was almost suffocating, like the silence before a storm. Lily greeted me with a smile, the same one she always wore when I came home. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice light and cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek just like she always did. I could feel the warmth of her lips, but it did nothing to ease the cold that had settled in my chest. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. How do you confront the person you love about something so devastating? How do you look them in the eye and ask them to explain what feels like a betrayal when you're still holding on to the love you once had for them? I didn't know how to begin, but I knew I had to. The truth couldn't stay buried any longer. "Lily," I began, my voice tight but steady, "we need to talk." Her smile faltered just slightly, but she recovered quickly, brushing it off. "What's on your mind?" I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the brief flicker of uncertainty. Maybe she knew this conversation was coming, or maybe she was just good at hiding it. But I wasn't going to let her dismiss this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. "I'm not sure how to say this, but I know about you and Tom." The words felt like they were tearing through my chest, but I had to say them. I had to break the silence that had been hanging between us for weeks now. Her face went pale, her hands freezing mid-motion as she was stirring the pot on the stove. The kitchen, once a place of comfort, now felt like a battlefield. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lily replied, her voice faltering just a little. I shook my head, not believing the denial, but still hoping that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. "I've seen the way you two interact, the way you act when I'm not around. It's not just friendship anymore, Lily." She took a step back, her face a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. "Ethan, you're imagining things. Tom's my friend, that's all. You know that." I could see the words tumbling out, but they felt hollow. I had seen enough. The footage from the cameras, the whispers, the way Tom's presence had shifted from casual visits to something more. I had watched the way they looked at each other, the way their words were laced with familiarity, intimacy. "No, Lily, I'm not imagining things." My voice was quiet but firm. "I know about the late-night conversations, the moments you've shared that are too close for comfort. I've seen the way Tom looks at you, and I've seen how you look at him." Her eyes dropped to the floor. I didn't need her to say anything more. The silence spoke volumes. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't apologizing. She was trying to find the right words to justify what had happened. "I never meant for it to happen this way," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tom and we've been friends for so long. We've been there for each other when things got tough. I never intended to hurt you, Ethan. I swear." Her words seemed rehearsed, practiced. I had to swallow the lump in my throat that threatened to choke me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hear that this was just a misunderstanding, but deep down I knew better. The truth was staring me in the face, and I had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. "So what exactly was it then?" I asked, my voice shaking now, though I still tried to hold it together. "Was it just emotional? Or did you cross that line with him? Because I deserve to know. I deserve to hear the truth from you." Lily looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it again, the words seemingly trapped inside. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Nothing physical happened," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I won't lie. I developed feelings for him, more than I should have. I've been struggling with it. I didn't want to hurt you, Ethan. I didn't want to hurt us." It felt like my heart had dropped to the floor. I had suspected it for weeks, but hearing her confirm it made it real, and the reality hit harder than I was prepared for. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the pain, the betrayal. My hands were shaking and my chest ached. "I don't know what to do now," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you, Ethan. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to find a way to forgive her, to make this right. But the damage had been done. The trust we'd built had been shattered, and no amount of words could fix it now." I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "I need space, Lily. I need time to process this. I need to figure out what happens next." She nodded, tears filling her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Not after everything. The confrontation with Lily had been a brutal revelation, and though the truth was now out in the open, it didn't bring the relief I thought it would. Instead, it left me feeling more lost than ever. The words she had said to me, the admission of her feelings for Tom, echoed in my head like a constant drumbeat. Nothing physical, she claimed. But how could I trust her now? How could I ever see her the same way again? I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying the conversation over and over, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't just the emotional betrayal that stung. It was the fact that my best friend, someone I had trusted for years, had been the one to get too close to her. The realization that my wife and Tom shared something deeper than I had ever known ate away at me, and I couldn't rest until I had all the answers. The only way I could see to get to the bottom of this, to truly understand the extent of their betrayal, was through evidence. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my next steps. I had to be logical about it. The cameras I'd installed in the house were one thing, but they had only given me glimpses. They didn't tell the full story. If I wanted clarity, I needed more than just a few frames of video footage. I needed to know everything. That's when I called Marcus Green. Marcus was a former detective turned private investigator. I'd worked with him a couple of times in the past for smaller, less personal matters, but I knew he was the kind of guy who could get the job done without drawing attention. I explained everything to him, the sudden visits from Tom, the strange atmosphere in the house, and Lily's confession. He listened carefully, his voice calm and measured, which only made me feel like I was doing the right thing. "I'll handle it discreetly," Marcus assured me. "We'll start by following Tom. I'll gather what I can, and I'll let you know what I find." As much as I hated the idea of having someone follow Tom, I knew I had no other choice. If I wanted answers, this was the only way to get them. The next few days passed in a blur. I worked long hours, trying to keep my mind occupied, but all I could think about was the investigation unfolding in the background. Marcus was gathering footage, checking phone records, and interviewing people who might have seen Tom and Lily together outside of their usual interactions. I tried not to dwell on it, to avoid the thoughts that swirled in my mind, but it was impossible. The question loomed over me. What had really happened between them? Was Lily telling the truth when she said it was just emotional? I was so consumed with doubt that I didn't notice how much I was changing. I became more withdrawn, barely engaging with Lily when she tried to talk to me. Every word she spoke felt like a lie, no matter how innocent it seemed. She apologized over and over, but I couldn't hear it anymore. The trust between us was gone, and nothing she said could bring it back. The emotional distance between us had widened, and I knew that things would never be the same. On the 5th day, Marcus called me. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "Ethan," he began, "I've got something." I sat up straighter, my heart racing. "What did you find?" "I've been tailing Tom for a few days now. I've got footage of him meeting Lily at a cafe near her studio. They were talking, and it wasn't just casual. It was intimate." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had prepared myself for something like this, but hearing it confirmed made it feel real. My stomach twisted, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. They were sitting close, laughing together. It wasn't anything too overt, but I can tell you this. It's more than just a friendship. There's something going on there, Ethan. I wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper into the details of what Marcus had seen, but the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. "Thanks, Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse. "Keep going. Get me everything you can. I need to know the full story." "I will," he replied. "I'll keep you updated." As I hung up the phone, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. The investigation had begun, and I knew there was no turning back. The truth was out there now, and I had to face it, no matter how painful it might be. For the rest of the evening, I did my best to ignore Lily. She tried to reach out to me, but every time she spoke, her voice felt like a distant echo. I didn't want her to comfort me, didn't want her apologies. I wanted answers. Real answers. As the days passed, I began to see just how much my world had shifted. The man I had been was slipping away, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. someone who was consumed with the need to know the truth no matter the cost. The truth, it seemed, was always just a little out of reach, always just beyond my grasp. But I wasn't going to stop until I had it. The days blurred together. I kept my distance from Lily, each day feeling longer than the last, as if time itself were stretching to make me suffer. I watched her like a stranger, her every word a reminder of the growing distance between us. I had no idea how to bridge that gap, nor if I even wanted to. The investigation continued in the background, Marcus sending me more footage, more details, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. The turning point came unexpectedly, like a door opening to reveal a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. It wasn't the footage, nor the phone calls, nor the long silent nights that brought everything to a head. It was one simple evening, when everything finally aligned in the worst possible way. The day had started like any other. I woke up early, went to the gym, tried to pretend that everything was normal. Lily had already left for work when I returned home. She had a meeting with a new client, a potential project she had been working on for weeks. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know where she was going or who she was meeting. It was easier this way, to stay in the dark, to keep the peace, to avoid feeling the anger that simmered just beneath the surface. It was late afternoon when I received the text from Marcus. A short, cryptic message that read, "Got something, you need to see this." My heart stopped. I stood frozen, staring at my phone, trying to push aside the gnawing fear that surged within me. I wanted to ignore it, to delete the message and pretend everything was fine, but I knew better. I had to know. I had to see it all, no matter how much it tore me apart. I called Marcus immediately. He answered on the first ring, his voice low, careful. "Ethan," he began, "I've got a recording of Tom and Lily. They're meeting again, this time at her place. I thought you should know. You'll want to see this." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My throat tightened. "Send it to me." He did, and I didn't waste any time. I opened the video. My stomach dropped as the footage began to play. It was dark outside. The dim glow of the street lamp outside Lily's studio illuminated the scene. Tom's truck pulled up to her building, the engine idling for a few moments before he stepped out and walked to the door. He knocked, and Lily answered almost immediately. There was no hesitation, no waiting. She opened the door with a smile, and as she did, I saw it. A brief but unmistakable touch. A hand on her back. An intimate gesture. A gesture I had never seen before, not between friends. I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat. The video continued, showing them talking inside. They seemed to be laughing, but it was the way they laughed, the ease with which they interacted. That struck me. There was no barrier between them, no sign of the restraint that friends might share. It was as if they were more than that, as if they had crossed a line that was now too difficult to uncross. The video continued to show them interacting more intimately, Lily stepping closer, her hand brushing against Tom's arm as they talked, a soft touch on his shoulder. At one point, their faces were mere inches apart, and for the first time I saw it. The look in Lily's eyes wasn't the look of a wife who loved her husband. It was something else entirely. It was the look of someone who had found something in someone else, something she hadn't found in me. I felt the walls close in around me as the footage played. Every second, every frame felt like a punch to the gut. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. Was this the betrayal I had been fearing all along? Was this the truth I had been too afraid to confront? I watched until the video ended. The final shot was of them walking away together, laughing as they disappeared into the night. I couldn't breathe. The weight of it all settled on me, suffocating me. I had seen enough. I knew enough now. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, unable to move. It was as if I had been frozen in place, my mind spinning with anger, confusion, and heartbreak. I had to confront them. I had to know the truth, and I had to do it now. I didn't wait for Lily to come home. Instead, I grabbed my jacket, walked out the door, and drove straight to her studio. I couldn't wait any longer. The storm inside me was raging, and I needed to unleash it. By the time I reached her studio, the sun had set, and the streetlights flickered above. I could feel the pulse of anger building inside me as I parked the car and stepped out. My hands shook as I approached the door, but I was determined. I couldn't back down now. I had to confront Lily, and I had to do it on my terms. As I knocked on the door, my heart raced in my chest. When Lily opened it, her face fell as soon as she saw me standing there. She knew. She knew what I had found. "I know," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I know everything. It's time we finally talked." The confrontation with Lily was everything I had dreaded, and yet nothing prepared me for the rawness of it. I had seen the betrayal with my own eyes, but hearing her words, the quiet admission, the broken apologies, only deepened the wound. There were no more questions left, no more uncertainties. I knew what I had to do, but knowing something and actually doing it are two entirely different things. After that night, I could hardly sleep. The anger that had been festering inside me threatened to boil over at any moment. But beneath it was something else, something I hadn't expected, a numbness, a hollow emptiness that made me wonder if anything was worth salvaging. I spent the following days in a haze, trying to make sense of what had happened, and I knew that I couldn't stay in this house. This place, once full of life and love, now felt like a prison. Lily and I had exchanged only the bare minimum of words since the confrontation. She had moved into the guest room, and we barely spoke except when necessary. The emotional distance between us was now a physical one as well. But as the silence stretched on, I realized that doing nothing wasn't an option. I wasn't going to sit idly by, hoping things would somehow fix themselves. If I wanted to move on, if I wanted to reclaim my life, I needed to take action. That meant confronting the truth, both legally and emotionally. I called a lawyer. It was a decision I had wrestled with for a few days. Divorce had been on my mind since that moment I saw the footage. It had felt inevitable, but I needed a plan. I needed someone who could help me navigate the path that lay ahead. The emotional chaos was one thing, but the legal process? That was something I couldn't afford to get wrong. I found a lawyer with a strong reputation in divorce cases. She was calm, professional, and direct. Her name was Samantha Blake, and from the moment we sat down in her office, I knew I had made the right choice. She asked all the right questions, listened intently to everything I said, and by the end of the meeting, I had a strategy in place. "You're not the first person to deal with something like this," she had said, her voice steady but understanding. "It's messy, it's painful, but we can make sure you get what you deserve." Her words, though practical, hit harder than I expected. What I deserved. For the first time in a while, I felt like I wasn't just a passive observer in my own life. I was taking control. The next few weeks were a blur. I spent my days gathering all the evidence Marcus had compiled, video footage, photos, phone records, and met with Samantha regularly to prepare for the divorce proceedings. The more we went over the details, the more certain I became that this was the right choice. I had to move forward. I couldn't keep living in this purgatory of uncertainty, of lingering hope that something would change. I was ready to leave it all behind. The hardest part, however, wasn't making the decision to file for divorce. It was the reality of what it meant. It meant that everything we had built, all the years, the memories, the life we had shared, was being torn apart. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me still wanted to fight for it. But how could I? How could I fight for a marriage when the foundation had crumbled so completely? I called Lily that evening after spending the afternoon with Samantha. My hands shook as I dialed her number, my mind racing. When she answered, her voice sounded tired, resigned. "Ethan, what is it?" she asked, her voice soft, almost tentative. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "We need to talk. I've made a decision." There was a long pause before she responded. "What kind of decision?" "I'm filing for divorce," I said simply. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in this limbo." I heard her gasp, the sound full of pain and regret. "Ethan, please, please don't do this. We can fix this, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes." I didn't answer right away. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Could we fix this? Could I really forgive her and rebuild our life together? But deep down, I knew the answer. I had already made my choice. We were done. "I'm sorry, Lily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't think we can." The silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I understand." It was the last conversation we had before the papers were filed. She moved out of the house a week later, taking only a few of her things, leaving behind the life we had once shared. The process moved quickly after that. Samantha handled everything, from the separation of assets to the legal proceedings. It was a cold, mechanical process, and each step felt like I was tearing apart a part of myself that I wasn't ready to lose. But it was necessary. I had to do this to move on, to find closure. In the days that followed, I spent my time getting my life back in order. I focused on my work, threw myself into the things I loved, and started seeing a therapist to help me work through the emotional aftermath of the divorce. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day I felt a little more in control, a little more like myself. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. How did we get here? How had everything gone so wrong? As I sat in my apartment, staring out the window at the city below, I realized the answer wasn't as important as what came next. The next chapter of my life had already begun, and it was up to me to write it. The divorce proceedings were moving forward faster than I had anticipated, but something inside me still refused to let go completely. The rational part of me had already made peace with the decision. We were done. There was no going back. But the other part of me, the part that had once loved Lily with every ounce of my being, couldn't help but feel unsettled. The need to fully understand what had happened, why it had happened, gnawed at me. I had to know everything, every detail, even if it was going to hurt. As I sat at my kitchen table one evening, scrolling through the footage Marcus had gathered for me, a pit formed in my stomach. The evidence was overwhelming. Tom and Lily had shared more than just moments of affection. They had shared an entire world, a world that I hadn't even known existed. The video footage showed them laughing together, leaning into each other, their body language intimate in ways that went beyond friendship. They had crossed a line, and I was beginning to see the full scope of their betrayal. I was no longer just angry. I was bewildered. How had I been so blind? How had I missed the signs? The way Tom would linger just a little too long when he was around Lily, or the way she would smile just a little too brightly when he walked into the room. These were the small details that had escaped my notice in the past, the quiet signs of something deeper, something more dangerous. But as much as the footage hurt, it wasn't enough. Not for me. Not yet. I needed more. I needed concrete proof, a deeper understanding of what had been happening when I wasn't around. What had Tom and Lily been talking about when I wasn't looking? What had been going on behind closed doors in the shadows where I couldn't see? I called Marcus again. This time I wasn't asking for casual surveillance. I wanted him to dig deeper, to find out everything. Not just about Tom's interactions with Lily, but about everything he had been doing during the days when I was at work, when I thought I was living in peace. "Ethan, you're asking for a lot," Marcus had said when I laid out my request. "But I understand. I'll get what you need, and I'll do it quickly." Over the next week, Marcus became my eyes and ears, gathering phone records, speaking to people in the neighborhood, and digging into Tom's activities when he wasn't at work or at my house. He followed Tom to meetings, to places I hadn't known he frequented, and he even managed to get his hands on private communication that Tom had deleted. Things he thought would never see the light of day. It felt invasive, uncomfortable, but it was the only way I could get the closure I desperately needed. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but with each new piece of evidence, the truth became clearer. Tom had been hiding more than I ever imagined. The phone records revealed frequent late-night calls between him and Lily, calls that had started months before I had even suspected anything. The messages were subtle, but the tone was unmistakable. There was no denying it. Tom had been emotionally involved with Lily, and maybe more than that. One afternoon, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the details Marcus had sent me. As I clicked through the messages, one stood out. It was a text message from Tom to Lily that read, "I miss you. It's been too long. I can't wait to see you again tonight." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My heart clenched as the weight of what it meant sank in. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of weakness. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was an affair, plain and simple, and it had been going on for much longer than I realized. They had been hiding it from me for months, playing their parts perfectly while I was none the wiser. I felt sick to my stomach, but there was no turning back now. The evidence was all there. I had seen enough. It was time to confront the reality, even if it shattered what little hope I had left. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. I needed to confront Tom. I couldn't let him slip away into the background, out of my reach. I needed him to understand the gravity of his actions. He had crossed a line, not just with Lily, but with me. I had trusted him with everything, my friendship, my marriage, and he had betrayed both. I knew what I had to do next. The divorce was only the first step, but this was personal. It wasn't just about ending my marriage anymore. It was about taking control of my life and holding those responsible for the pain they caused. I scheduled a meeting with Tom. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. This was going to be the hardest conversation I had ever had in my life. I waited for the day to arrive with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The truth was there in my hands, and soon it would be out in the open. The time had come. Every piece of evidence I had gathered, every moment of doubt, had led to this confrontation. I knew what I had to do, but as I walked through the door, a part of me wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. That maybe I could hear something that would make it all make sense. Something that would make me forgive her, make me forgive them both. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't unsee the messages, the footage, the lies. What had been built between us was broken beyond repair. The foundation of trust that we had spent years cultivating had crumbled in an instant. And now, as I stood in front of Lily, there was nothing left but the truth. I had asked her to meet me, to sit down and talk. She agreed, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. The moment I stepped into the living room, I saw her sitting on the couch, her body tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't know what I had discovered, not yet. But I knew it was time to end the silence between us. "I found out everything, Lily," I said, my voice steady but the anger simmering just below the surface. "I know what you and Tom have been doing. I know about the calls, the texts, the meetings." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked as though she had been struck. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she looked down at her hands as if searching for something to hold on to. "I didn't want it to happen," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far. You have to believe me, Ethan. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "You never meant for it to go this far? You're telling me that you didn't mean to cross the line with my best friend? That it was some kind of accident?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just something that happened when we were both hurting. We got too close, and then it became something I didn't know how to stop. I was confused, Ethan. I was lost. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you. You know that. I always have." Her voice cracked, but it did nothing to soften the anger that had taken root in me. I had spent days trying to understand, trying to make sense of her words, but now I saw them for what they really were. Excuses. Excuses for her betrayal, for everything she had hidden from me. "Confused?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You were confused? And that's supposed to make it okay? What about the lies, the secret meetings, the texts that you sent him, Lily? The intimate conversations that you thought I would never know about?" I paused, my chest tightening as I fought to control the surge of emotions. "I trusted you. I trusted you with my life, with everything, and you threw it all away for him, for Tom." The name hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had happened. Her face faltered, and for a brief moment I saw the remorse in her eyes. Real, raw remorse. But it wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. Not after everything. "I know I've destroyed everything," she said softly, tears now streaming down her face. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Ethan. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was about me, about feeling lost, feeling like I wasn't enough. And then I found someone who..." Who made me feel seen? Her words were heavy, and for a moment I could almost believe her. Almost. But the doubt that had been planted in my heart was too strong now. The lies, the secrets, the years of pretending everything was fine, none of it could be washed away with tears or apologies. "You know what I can't understand?" I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "You said you were feeling lost, but when I was right here, when I was doing everything I could to support you, to love you, you pushed me away. You turned to him instead of me." I stepped closer, the weight of everything crashing down on me as I spoke. "I don't know who you are anymore, Lily. You're not the woman I married. You're not the woman I trusted." She sobbed, her face contorted with grief. "Ethan, please, I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can fix it." I stood there staring at her, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The woman I had loved, the woman who had been my partner, was now a reflection of everything I had feared, a shadow of the person I thought I knew, and as much as I wanted to hold on, to somehow make it all right, I knew that the trust we had was gone. It had been shattered, and nothing would bring it back. "I can't do this anymore, Lily," I said, my voice steady, but the hurt was still there, just beneath the surface. "I can't keep living in this lie. You've broken me, and I can't keep pretending that we can fix this. It's over." She fell silent, her sobs the only sound in the room. I couldn't look at her any longer. I turned away, walking toward the door. "I'm done, Lily. I need to move on." And with that, I left the house, the door closing behind me with the finality of a life that had been destroyed. I left the house that night without looking back. The weight of what had just happened was unbearable, but the truth was clear now. There was no more room for denial, no more excuses to make. I had faced Lily's confession, confronted the lies, and finally acknowledged the depth of her betrayal. But walking away felt like an enormous leap into an unknown future, one that was now devoid of the life I thought I knew. The city felt like a blur as I drove aimlessly, my thoughts racing. Every stoplight, every turn felt like I was moving further away from the life I had built. And yet, there was a strange sense of liberation in it. The storm of emotions that had consumed me for weeks now felt calmer in a way. The anger had been replaced by a raw, aching clarity. I was done. But being done didn't make the decision any easier. It was the kind of choice that carved into you, leaving a scar that would never quite heal. I was walking away from not just a marriage, but a shared life, the dreams, the memories, the quiet moments we had once shared. And as much as I had needed this distance, the realization hit me hard. I was alone. I parked in a small, quiet park, the kind I used to visit when I needed space to think. The night air was cool, and the rustle of the leaves in the trees above seemed to match the turmoil swirling in my mind. I got out of the car, walking aimlessly along the path, trying to make sense of it all. In the end, the decision wasn't just about Lily. It wasn't even about Tom. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace. But how did I find my way forward when so much of me was tied to the past? I had always believed in the sanctity of marriage. I had thought that love could overcome anything, that with enough effort and trust, you could weather any storm. But I had been wrong. I had given Lily my heart, my trust, and she had betrayed it. I wasn't sure what kind of person that made me now. Was I a fool for believing in something that turned out to be a lie? Or was I simply someone who had been hurt? Someone who had to learn to move on? The decision had come down to this. I had to choose myself. I hadn't expected it to be so painful. In the beginning, it had felt like a fight, a battle between what I wanted and what I knew I needed. But now, with the clarity of the night air and the solitude surrounding me, it was just a stark reality. There was no future for me in the relationship I had been holding on to. It was time to close that door and look ahead. But even in the quiet of the park, I knew it wouldn't be easy. It was never easy to let go of someone you had once trusted with everything. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings with Samantha, the lawyer, and finalizing the divorce proceedings. Each conversation felt like another step toward closure, but it was a process that brought little peace. I was doing the right thing, but the heaviness of the decision still lingered in my chest. I would sign the papers, I would officially end my marriage, but there was still a part of me that would never fully understand how it had all unraveled so quickly. It wasn't until I received the official divorce papers in the mail that I realized just how final everything had become. I sat in my living room staring at the papers in front of me, my mind numb. It was official now. I was no longer bound to Lily. We were no longer a family. The life we had once dreamed of together had evaporated, leaving only empty spaces and unanswered questions. I couldn't help but think back to the man I had been before all of this. The man who had trusted, who had loved, who had believed that everything he built would last. That man felt like someone else entirely. The person I was now had been forged in the flames of betrayal, and while I was stronger for it, the cost was impossible to ignore. I spent the next few days reflecting on my future, on what came next. I knew I had to heal, to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been lost. But I also knew that healing wasn't a linear path. There would be days when I would feel better, and days when the weight of everything would crush me again. But one thing became clear. I would never allow myself to be in a position like this again. I had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, couldn't always be repaired. And while that lesson was painful, it was one that would shape who I became moving forward. The next step was mine to take. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew I had to start over. The past was gone, and the future, though uncertain, was in my hands. The decision had been made, and now it was time to live with it. It's strange how quickly the mind can adjust, how it can build walls around the pain and compartmentalize the agony. But no matter how high the walls are, they always find a way to crack, to let the pain seep through. After everything, the confrontation, the divorce, the finality of it all, I found myself standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't anger that consumed me anymore, nor the bitter remnants of betrayal. It was something deeper, a quiet emptiness. The decision to end things had come with a strange sense of relief, but that relief didn't last. It was a fleeting moment, like the calm after a storm, but I had no idea what was left in the aftermath. The life I had known, the dreams I had shared with Lily, were gone. I wasn't sure who I was without them. The first few days after the divorce were the hardest. I stayed in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my past. The photos of Lily and me still hung on the walls, our wedding picture framed on the mantel. Everything was a constant reminder of what I had lost. Every step I took in that apartment felt like a step further from who I used to be. I wasn't angry at Lily anymore. That fire had burned out, replaced by a quiet sorrow that I wasn't sure how to handle. What I had once called home no longer felt like mine. I found myself questioning everything. The years we had spent together, the trust I had blindly given her, the moments we had shared. They all felt like illusions now, like they belonged to someone else. Healing wasn't an immediate process, and it wasn't a clean one either. There were days when I woke up feeling numb, going through the motions of life as if nothing had changed. There were others when I felt like I was drowning in a sea of unanswered questions, where I would lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. But I knew I couldn't stay in that place forever. I couldn't keep holding on to the past, no matter how painful it was. So I made a decision. I would find my way forward. I would heal, not for anyone else, but for me. I started by focusing on the little things. I began running again, something I had stopped doing when Lily and I had first moved in together. I had always found peace in the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the steady beat of my heart. It was a reminder that I was still here, that I was still alive. I also reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in months, people I had distanced myself from when things with Lily had become strained. We would meet for drinks, share stories, laugh about old times. For the first time in a long while, I felt a connection to something that wasn't tainted by the past. I had always thought that the friendships I had before Lily would stay constant, but I had let them slip away in favor of focusing all my energy on her. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Therapy was another step I took in the right direction. It wasn't easy to admit that I needed help, that I couldn't just fix myself on my own. But after months of living in a haze, I knew it was time. I found a therapist who specialized in helping people cope with loss, betrayal, and rebuilding their lives after trauma. It was difficult to open up at first to admit how much the betrayal had broken me. But as the weeks passed, I began to realize that talking about it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a necessary step toward healing. It wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about learning to live with it, to find a way to make peace with what had happened. I realized that I could never undo what had been done, but I didn't have to let it control me forever. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when I thought I was back at square one, but slowly I began to rebuild. One of the hardest things to face was the silence. The house, the apartment, the car. They were all reminders of the life I had once had with Lily. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of her, and it hurt. But one day, as I was cleaning out some of my old things, I realized something. I could create new memories in this space. It didn't have to be a place filled with ghosts. It could be a place where I started over. So I took down the old photos, the framed wedding picture, and packed them away. I didn't throw them out. That felt too harsh. But I put them in a box, somewhere out of sight, so that I could start fresh. I also began focusing on the things I had always wanted to do but had pushed aside. I signed up for a cooking class. I had always enjoyed cooking, but it had been something I'd done less and less over the years. I joined a book club, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for. I made time for myself, for the things that made me feel whole. Slowly but surely, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried for years. Healing was not an overnight process, and it wasn't without its struggles, but with each passing day, I felt stronger. The pain wasn't gone, but it no longer had the same power over me. I was learning to live again, to breathe again, and to let go of the past that had held me in its grip for so long. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if I would ever love again, or if I could ever trust someone the way I had trusted Lily. But I did know one thing. I was moving forward, and that, in itself, was enough for now. It's strange how time changes you. I had spent so many months, years even, lost in the whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and regret. But time, as it always does, passed. It softened the sharp edges of the hurt and gave me space to breathe, to think, to reflect on everything that had happened. And now, as I stood on the other side of it all, I realized something. I had survived. The pain that had once felt like a heavy weight on my chest had begun to ease, and in its place was something different, something new. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. It was clarity. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was beginning to understand that the person who had been hurt the most in all of this was not Lily or Tom, but me. The healing process had been anything but linear. There were days when the memories would flood back, the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what I could have done differently. The guilt, the shame, and the self-doubt still lingered in the corners of my mind, but they no longer had the same power over me. They were like shadows, present but unable to control me. I had finally come to accept that no one could ever completely undo the hurt caused by betrayal. No amount of apologies or regret could change what had happened, but I had also come to understand something else. I didn't need their validation to move forward. I didn't need them to apologize or even to understand the depth of their actions. I just needed to let go of the weight I had been carrying. It wasn't an easy thing to let go of anger. Anger had been my shield for so long, my way of protecting myself from the hurt. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized that holding on to it was like holding on to a burning coal. It didn't hurt anyone else. It only hurt me. I had stopped blaming myself for what happened. For so long, I had wondered if I had missed the signs, if I had failed somewhere along the way. I had been so consumed with guilt, so desperate to make sense of it all, that I hadn't realized something fundamental. I wasn't responsible for their choices. I wasn't the one who betrayed the trust that had been built. That burden wasn't mine to carry anymore. I began to look at my life from a new perspective. The house I had once shared with Lily no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a space I was rebuilding, brick by brick, memory by memory. And although I hadn't erased everything, I had made it mine again. I had created a new life for myself. A life where I was no longer defined by my past, but by the choices I made moving forward. I took a long walk one evening, something I hadn't done in a while. The streets were quiet, the air cool and still, and as I walked, I thought about how far I had come. I had gone from being a man completely consumed by betrayal and heartbreak to someone who had learned to live with it. Someone who had started to take the power back, who was learning to trust again. Not others necessarily, but myself. And then, as if by some divine coincidence, I passed a small cafe, one that Lily and I used to frequent when we first started dating. The memories came rushing back in an instant. The laughter, the warmth, the hopes we had for the future. For a split second, I wondered if I had made the right choice, if perhaps I had been too quick to let go of everything, but then, just as quickly, the clarity returned. The memories were beautiful, but they were in the past, and I couldn't live there forever. I walked into the cafe and ordered a coffee, sitting at a table by the window. I had done this before, years ago, but now it was different. This time, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't holding on to the past. I was simply enjoying the moment, a moment that was mine, free of guilt, free of regret. I realized then that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it. It's about taking the pieces of yourself that were shattered and using them to build something stronger, something more authentic. I had learned to let go of what I couldn't control, to stop holding on to things that no longer served me, and in doing so, I had found a peace I hadn't thought possible. The journey had been long, and it had been painful, but I had come out of it stronger, more whole than I had been before. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first walked away from Lily. I had been changed, not by the betrayal, but by how I had chosen to respond to it. The truth was, I had no idea what the future held. I didn't know if I would fall in love again, or if I would ever trust someone the way I had trusted Lily. But I did know this. I was no longer afraid of what might come. I had healed, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. And that was enough. As we reach the end of this journey, it's important to reflect on the powerful lessons this story teaches us. Betrayal, while painful, doesn't have to define us. It's a part of life that many of us experience, but how we choose to respond to it is what truly matters. The real power comes from the ability to heal, to forgive ourselves, and to let go of the things and people that no longer serve us. This story reminds us that while we cannot control others' actions, we do have the power to control how we move forward. Healing isn't linear. It takes time, self-compassion, and most importantly, the courage to choose ourselves. So, as we reflect on the journey of this character, let's ask ourselves, how can we take the lessons from their pain and use them to become stronger, better versions of ourselves? What do you think is the key to moving forward after such a deep betrayal? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to let go of someone or something in order to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that explore the complexities of relationships, healing, and personal growth. I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Let's continue this conversation, and I look forward to sharing the next chapter of stories with you soon. End of story.